Welcome, everybody. Really appreciate you all for joining us tonight. My name is Matt Elkin. I'm here on behalf of the Jewish Coaches Association. I'm here with Adam Gordon on behalf of Rising Coaches. And we are extremely excited to present to you guys tonight a conversation with someone who's become a good friend of mine and someone who many of you may know personally or through his time playing basketball at a variety of levels, but would love to introduce everybody this evening to Dan Grunfeld. Dan is here with us to speak about his new book that he has written. It's called By the Grace of the Game. It's a really unique story, and I'm really excited to have Dan talk a little bit about that. But before we dive into his book, I just wanted to give a brief introduction for those of you who might be unfamiliar with Dan and a little bit of his backstory, and then we'll get right into it. So Dan is originally from New Jersey, but at an early age, he moved to the state of Wisconsin along with his father, Ernie, who was the GM of the Milwaukee Bucks. It was in Wisconsin, the great state of Wisconsin, where Dan really embraced his basketball stardom. And if any of this is wrong, Dan, by the way, feel free to jump in. But
hey, Matt, the only thing I'll say is I always would have embraced basketball stardom. It just didn't come, as much as I would have wanted to.
Yes, good. That's a very, very fair correction to make. So Dan's senior year, he averaged 23.9. I'll just round it up to 24. 7 rebounds and 2 assists.
That always hurts. Please say 24.
Yeah. 24 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists at Nicolay High School. He was first team All-State. He ended up graduating and moving on to play college basketball at Stanford. And he was named All Pac-10 his junior and his senior year. He was also an academic All-American.
Matt, if I'm going to say about the good things I did, I have to correct that I was only All Pac-10 my junior year. I want to be transparent to everyone.
Okay, perfect. That's on me. I got to do better research.
No.
Junior year, but still way more All Pac-10 awards than I ever won.
That's fair.
And then he also earned his MBA from Stanford. He led the U.S. to a gold medal in the 2009 Maccabi games. He had 25 and 12 in an overtime victory over Israel. So Dan had an incredible career. He also played in several countries overseas after his time at Stanford. And he's also an accomplished writer. He's been published more than 40 times in a variety of media outlets, such as Sports Illustrated, the Jerusalem Post, NBC News, and a variety of others. He currently serves as the director of a venture capitalist firm. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, venture capital firm. Yep.
And he lives in the Bay Area now with his wife and his son. And all that to be said, Dan has an incredibly unique story to tell us tonight. And so before we dive into your book, Dan, I just wanted to ask you, this group here is kind of made up of a variety of people around basketball and around the game of basketball, people that are passionate about the game. So just talk to us a little bit about your experience kind of growing up and playing ball and kind of how it's led to you to where you are today.
For sure, I will. And listen, thanks to everyone for joining. It's great to chat. Hopefully this will be casual. Please interject with questions, but I'm just grateful for everyone spending a little time. So Matt, to your question, I mean, I grew up around the game of basketball. When I was born, my dad was a player for the New York Knicks, and actually my birth was scheduled in between 2 of his road trips so he could be there for when I was born and then for my bris. So quite literally, I was born around the game of basketball and Judaism. Grew up in gyms, since my dad was an NBA player and later an executive, it's always what I wanted to do. And so just really, committed to it. And we'll get into the book a little later, but, my dad's background is pretty much the opposite of mine. Someone who came from a completely different world and kind of found stardom through basketball. And, I always kind of wanted to walk a similar path, even though I kind of had a different background.
That's awesome. And coming up, how was it having to move, around kind of based on your dad and getting to experience a variety of different settings and environments within basketball, kind of through your dad and through what he was doing in the NBA?
Yeah, it's a great question. I also want to say hi to Coach Pearl, who just jumped in. Coach Pearl on our previous call said that one of the best things he did was coach me in Israel. I mean, one of the best things I ever did was play for Coach Pearl in Israel. Not only did we win, but Bruce is a very close friend. But playing for Bruce, and Coach, I say to this day, Bruce is the best motivator I've ever been around. And so all the success that Auburn is having right now is not by accident. So I had to shout out Coach Pearl and say hello and send it right back at you. The question was about moving around as a kid. Listen, I was lucky my dad had a lot of longevity. So he was with the New York Knicks for 17 years. So from the time I was born until I was 15, I lived in northern New Jersey. He was fired from the Knicks my freshman year in high school. The team he built subsequently went to the NBA Finals. So there was a little, it's obviously an emotional thing to see your dad get fired and then see the team do very well. He was quickly hired by the Milwaukee Bucks. So we moved to Milwaukee, and that's where, we got close with Coach Pearl, who was at UWM. And honestly, being around basketball, and you all see it, there's not a lot of stability, but it brings families really close. You kind of have to be insular because you never know when one team is going to end and another one will begin. So it was really a journey. I always traveled hand in hand with my family, and it just really brought us together. And honestly, I saw the country, I had met different people. I don't think I ever would have gotten to Stanford if I didn't move to Milwaukee, because the high school basketball there was very good. I went to a really good public high school. And so everything happens for a reason. And I just think, the game of basketball has always kind of been the thread that tied my family together, regardless of where we lived.
Thanks for sharing, Dan. And yeah, just like Dan alluded to, and I didn't mention this in the beginning, we do want this to be relatively informal. And so, if anybody does have any questions at any time, please feel free to, drop it in the chat or raise your hand, or just let me know, and would love to, include as many of you guys in the conversation as possible. So I wanted to move forward a little bit, and, a little bit of background, and I'm sure, Dan, you can get into it just about your dad and his kind of story, but he was an incredible player in his own right, and was actually inducted into the first ever class of the National Jewish Sports Hall of Fame in 1993, along with 7 others, including Sandy Koufax, Marv Albert, Red Holzman, and several other extremely accomplished Jewish athletes and coaches. How important, Dan, has it been for you and for your dad, through your successes that you guys have respectively had, to pave the way for other Jewish athletes or Jewish coaches, or just in general, people that want to get involved in sports in whatever capacity?
Yeah, I mean, super important. I also say, and caveat at that, while my dad and I both did have a nice amount of success as players, my dad's career was truly legendary, where I had a nice career, and I'm not selling myself short or anything like that. But what my dad did, and particularly where he came from, is truly inspirational. But even myself as well, as a Jewish athlete, it's always been important to set a good example, not only with what you achieve, but how you approach it, right? The values that you bring, the hard work, the commitment, the sense of community, and just being Jewish, really matters to my family. And we'll get into it regarding what happened to my dad and his family, prior to coming to America. But being Jewish really matters to me, really matters to my dad. He played in the Maccabiah games in 1973. Actually, my dad, he's an immigrant from Romania. He was bound for Israel with his family. They fled communism as refugees, and at the last minute they came to America. But the rest of the family settled in Israel. So really important place for my family. By the way, it's important to know my dad, they won a silver medal in 1973. My dad won an Olympic gold medal in 1976, but I won the Maccabiah gold in 2009 with Coach Pearl. So I could always tell him, man, I was like, hey, you might have that Olympic gold, but I got the Maccabiah gold, man. He goes, hey, can't argue with that. But no, listen, all to say, being Judaism really, really matters to us, and always trying to set a good example, really matters.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Dan. So, I'd like to, now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the background and a little bit about your dad, I wanted to just dive into your new book. And so, really wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about, kind of what inspired you to tell the story that you tell in By the Grace of the Game. Was there a specific person or a specific event or something in particular that inspired you to kind of share this story, your unique story with the world?
My grandmother is really the central figure of the book, and she lives 25 minutes away from me, my wife, here in the Bay Area. She came to every home game I played at Stanford. She survived the Holocaust. And so my dad is the only player in NBA history, and in fact, in the history of any of the major professional sports in America, whose parents survived the Holocaust. And it's kind of an unknown fact of his life. And the book gets pretty deep and is really an exploration of a lot of things. But, my dad, my dad found basketball, and it took him and our family to a different world. And he was so close to a lot of that trauma that he doesn't have the luxury to look back on it because it's so raw and painful. But I have a generation of separation, and my grandmother is my hero. She's also a hero. She saved people's lives during the war, in addition to her own. So she truly is a hero. And, she's 96, still doing amazing. We had dinner Wednesday night before Yom Kippur, which I can never pace myself appropriately. So it's always a dance there at the end. Am I going to keep the food down or not? That's a whole different story. I do talk about it in the book. She's doing great, but, she's always been such a special figure in my life, and kind of feeling the profound nature of that journey. Really, I mean, we're talking about surviving the Holocaust and then going to the top of the Olympic podium, to the NBA. It was a story that was really important to me, when I wanted to tell. Writing is one of my great loves. So you mentioned some of my writing in the past. I've written a lot for different places and been published a lot. And so this story was always kind of my white whale, like, hey, this matters. I thought it mattered to me, of course, it's my family story, but I thought it mattered on a larger scale just because of the themes of perseverance and overcoming adversity and family and legacy and all those things. So when I got to business school at Stanford, I had a little bit of time to explore things. And I said, hey, and everyone on this call will appreciate it. I was like, if I want to write this, I have to approach this like I did with basketball. I'd wake up early in the morning. I'd run on the track. I'd get my shots in. I'd do my drills. I was like, if I want to write this book, I have to approach it like I did basketball. So got up early every morning for 8 months when I was really in the core writing phase, and kind of approached it like I did hoops. And it's been 5 years, but the book comes out in 2 months. So it's been quite the journey, but I'm proud to tell the story.
Yeah, and we're really excited for that time when we can all check out the book and listen to the story. Is there anything in particular, Dan, any stories, any parts of the book that you can share with us in terms of specific anecdotes or things that, that would help get us kind of excited or intrigued about kind of what the story is? I'm sure there's plenty.
No, there is. I mean, I think, high level, what I think is, I mean, my grandmother has a big story of surviving the war. And if anyone here is familiar with kind of Holocaust history, there's a Swedish diplomat, Raoul Wallenberg. I mean, actually, the street outside of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., it's called Raoul Wallenberg Way. He's credited with saving about 100,000 Jews, mostly in Budapest, Hungary. My grandmother was one of them, and he was saved twice by her. So, my grandma's story, surviving the war, is big. And, luckily she's so sharp. She has an amazing memory. So I did a 1.5 years of interviews with her, my dad, and others to try to really understand what happened. I mean, my dad didn't have any grandparents. He lost them all in Auschwitz. My grandmother lost both parents, 5 siblings, so just kind of understanding what happened to all that family. But, as it relates to basketball, like, my dad came to America not speaking English, never touched a basketball. He had an older brother who was his hero, diagnosed with leukemia not long after arriving in the States, and died a year later. So my dad didn't speak the language. My grandparents had to work, 7 days a week to put food on the table. His brother had just died, really a hard situation for so many reasons. And he just went to the park to meet friends, to learn English. And I think we can all relate to, like, basketball giving us things in our lives, and my dad didn't really even know what he was looking for. He just knew he needed something, right? And he went to the playground and just started playing. And before you know it, it's like, okay, something's happening here. And he was really good. And then he was like really, really good. And, an interesting thing that I detail in the book, and my grandma always talks about this, my grandparents were kind of, working so hard to make a life in America. They never saw my dad play basketball. They just knew it was something he did. And I think about my upbringing. My mom was at every game. My dad's working me out. I'm like at Nick's practices. Patrick Ewing is giving me pointers. I had a lot of advantages and a lot of access to this game. My dad just played on the playgrounds and, was trying to find something. And, my grandparents got a call at their fabric store one night. The high school coach said, you should see this guy play basketball. He's going to be able to do this. And he's pretty good at this. And my grandma still tells a story, they got to the game late because they couldn't close their fabric store, because they're workaholics. And they got to the gym, and my grandfather, they got into the gym, and my grandfather said, where's Ernie? Where is he? And my grandma said, he's right there. Like, my grandfather couldn't even recognize him because he had kind of like transformed into another type of being that they had never seen. And, from there, my dad was an All-American. He graduated from Tennessee as the all-time leading scorer there, as the second leading scorer in the history of the SEC conference. And actually, a good trivia question, to this day, he's the 5th leading scorer in the history of the SEC conference. And I'm not sure that'll change, because if you average that many points and you don't go to the league, something's wrong with you. Back then you could average 20 a game for 4 years. and just stick around, which is what he did. And actually, it's funny. I was talking to him not long ago, and I told him, he knew I was going to be doing this, and I brought something up about the University of San Francisco. My good friend Todd Golden is their coach, and that was my a college game that I played. It was my first game my junior year, and my dad was reflecting on his first college game ever, and he just told me this a half hour ago. I never heard him say it. He's because he was an All-American in New York, but now he's in college, and he said, "Hey, I had 9 points at halftime." And he said, I remember sitting in the locker room saying, "Man, I got 9 points. Like if I have 9 again, I'm gonna have 18. I'm a freshman. It's my first game." Like he was like, "Oh, I'm feeling good about this." And he said to me, "You know how many I had in the second half?" I go, "No, how many did you have?" He goes, "I had 19." I was like, "Oh, cool. Now you have 28 for your first game." And you're really saying, "Oh, shoot, now there's really something here." So, he got to college and quickly realized like he was a star. He was, first team All SEC 4 years in a row, partnered with Bernard King, and then he's, again in the NBA, they played together. So, it's really an amazing American dream story. And, as it relates to the book, I also tell my story with basketball because, as I mentioned, it's so different. We're kind of chasing the same thing ultimately, but in a completely different way. So it's just like it's an intergenerational family story, and Judaism and basketball certainly are the core themes.
Now, Dan, let me ask you, like, I'm sure growing up outside of, learning all the stories about your dad and his playing career and whatnot, like this kind of narrative of the Holocaust and what your family had to overcome was probably just embedded in the fabric of your family's history just as much as anything else. Were there any specific stories that your father or people in your family have told you that made their way into the story? Were there certain things that maybe didn't make their way into the story because you felt that they just weren't appropriate to share? Were there specific things that you just remember as a kid and kind of through now that have kind of infused themselves and put themselves into the book that you produced for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I tried to be as honest and as vulnerable as possible, right? And by the way, which is a scary thing, because you put a book out, it's out there, right? But if you're going to do it, I wrote this from the heart. I didn't write this to be like a commercial vehicle or anything like this. I mean, there's a lot of great momentum behind it. I have a forward from Ray Allen, who's on the board of the Holocaust Museum, appointed by President Obama. I don't know if people on the call are aware of this, but Ray, who I know very well from my days in Milwaukee, is an amazing advocate for Holocaust education. And I mean, he walks the walk. He's been to Auschwitz. He took teammates to the Holocaust Museum every time he was in Washington, D.C. So Ray wrote an amazing forward, and there's really great momentum behind the book. But I wrote it just from the heart as something that really mattered to me, Matt, precisely because of what you just said. Growing up and hearing stories about people who are no longer around, that's a really big part of it. My grandmother's dad, they had a very special relationship, right? So he was essentially my hero's hero, right? Like we all look up to my grandmother. She looked up to him. He was killed in Auschwitz. His name was Solomon. My son's name is Solomon after him. So that's kind of how deep that thread runs. But yeah, just growing up, particularly from my grandma, because as I mentioned, like my dad doesn't really talk about this stuff. He grew up in a different way, and again, basketball kind of took him in a different direction, and some of that pain is so raw and real that it's probably hard to access. But I have that kind of space of a generation to be able to explore some of those things. And so, my grandmother's pretty open and talks a lot about the things that happened. And I did the research, but I know kind of how everyone, people were killed different ways, it's a horrible thing to have to confront, and it was really hard for my dad to read it when he did. But, just kind of understanding what happened, making peace with it, and also kind of pledging to live your life in a way that kind of, radiates the values that you want to see in the world, as opposed to the things that maybe your family has seen generations before. It was, it's basically what propelled me to write the book.
Well, I can only imagine, Dan, like how difficult it must have been at times to put some of those stories into writing and to read them and to reread them and to reread them. And but on behalf of everybody I know that is on this call and everybody that will watch this video at a later date, we do appreciate you putting that out there because it's so important that you share those stories.
And Matt, I'll say one other thing related, like, because I talk about my path with basketball, and I experienced anti-Semitism growing up. And I tell a little story in the book. Like I remember in the town I grew up in, a suburb of New York City, I remember opening a baseball shed and there was a big white swastika on the inside door. And my heart stopped, right? Because I had seen videos and, growing up and people making comments about Jew this and all these things. And, for me, particularly with what happened to my family, particularly with how much I cared about basketball, it was a source of motivation, man. I took it out on people, because I had gotten to a point where I could play, and a lot of the things that I experienced, not only just as a kid, but as a Jew, really, motivated me on the basketball court. And I wanted to make people pay in a lot of ways for some of the things that I'd experienced and certainly my family experienced. So, being Jewish, has affected not only my life, but really my basketball career in profound ways.
Yeah, no question. And, we are, we are really happy that we are partnering with Rising Coaches, along with the Jewish Coaches Association, to bring this call to everybody. And along with, kind of what I know the Rising Coaches represents in terms of young aspiring coaches wanting to get involved in the game of basketball. There's a lot of people that are so young that they probably will not have the chance to get to meet or interact with many Holocaust survivors. And I'm, myself kind of on that fringe where I can remember meeting some, but they were much later, and in generations beyond us will never get that chance. And we're kind of in that tough spot. So, that makes your story and what you've shared all the more important for us. So, I just wanted to ask, Dan, we mentioned you're an accomplished writer besides just this book as well. So you had an article that you wrote in the Jerusalem Post where I'm just going to quote, you said, a famous saying in the aftermath of the Holocaust has been never forget. That approach is not good enough. The act of forgetting is passive and inevitable. We forget lunches and car keys. We can't be given the chance to forget the most prolific mass genocide in human history. So can you just tell us why is it so important for us as Americans and as a human race to truly not just never forget, but to actively remember the Holocaust?
Yeah, I mean, it's, for me, it's always been, it's what man is capable of, right? It's the worst example of what we're capable of as a species, right? It is like the mass genocide on a scale that's unfathomable. And if we don't proactively keep it in our memories, it's to kind of memorialize those who perished and everything like that, but it's also to prevent anything like that from happening again, because there's a lot that has been said about the German people at that time. Like, the German people weren't bad people, they were just living their lives like everyone else. And then a leader, took over and these things happened. And here's, everyone knows where we got from that. So I think it's an imperative to, again, be proactive about telling these stories, understanding what happened, keeping these conversations going, because it just, people say never again. It could happen again if people aren't really aware of what man is capable of. And, for me on a personal level, as you said, like, interacting with Holocaust survivors, especially at this time as they're aging, not everyone has had an experience with them. Like I talk to my grandmother every day. We FaceTime every day with her great grandson, right, who was named after her father who perished in the war. My grandma, and Coach Pearl knows my grandma well. Like, she's the greatest person in the world. She has the most amazing spirit. She lost everyone. And so for me on a personal level, like, to, when something like that happens to someone that you love more than anything, you have to just, stand on the right side of that history and just make sure that people continue to talk about the Holocaust, to learn about it. I mean, if you look at the data, with millennials in the United States, it's staggering how, the percentage of people who know what Auschwitz was, who know how many people were killed, not only Jews, right? A lot of people. And so, obviously our education system is not doing a good enough job of making sure that everyone knows about this, of what happened, but it just, we need to tell those stories so it never happens again.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan. All right, well, I'm going to open it up to some questions. If anybody has one, I want to start off with Matt Turt. So please unmute yourself and feel free to ask Dan your question.
Matt, first let me say that your dad was my favorite player growing up in New York. I wore 18 when I attempted to play sports, and that's why I'm an SID and not a player. So that's, but you were talking about how your grandpa didn't really get a chance to see your dad play. What was it like when the recruiting process is going on and he's, northern, New York City area? I felt this when I moved across the country. I mean, what was that like, getting recruited to play in Knoxville, which in the 70s isn't, is not the population base of what it is now?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for the kind words about my dad. My dad wore number 18 for the Knicks. You know, that obviously an ode to the heritage. So really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, you know, so it's funny. So I mentioned like my grandparents had never seen my dad play until his junior year in high school. And as soon as they saw him, because my grandfather was a great athlete. So he was a world ranked ping pong player, he was a soccer player. He loved sports, loved it. He just hadn't seen him. But as soon as he saw him play, he said, you never have to come work at the store again. Just play your best, you know, so, and he never missed a game. And he was my dad's biggest fan. And, you know, they made a 30 for 30 about my dad and Bernard King. And my dad had 43 at Kentucky and they won. And in the clip in the 30 for 30, you see my grandpa run on the floor and kiss my dad on the cheek. Like he was so, you know, so after he finally saw him, he was so committed. But it's funny, your question about recruiting, and I talk about this in the book. My grandparents didn't speak, their English wasn't great. My dad didn't grow up with the university system, so they didn't really know what was going on. My grandma tells funny stories that she'd be on a Sunday cleaning the apartment. My grandfather was buying fabric. My dad was at the park playing basketball. There'd be a knock on the door. She'd open it up, and it was the Kentucky coaching staff. They said, hey, we're just in the neighborhood. You know, we just wanted to come by and say hi, you know. Oh, you're in the neighborhood, right? Like my grandma was like, Ernie's not home. I don't know what to tell you. He was recruited by like 100+ schools. You know, at the time, the Big East wasn't as good. And so there was, they kind of called the pipeline to the South. A lot of New York players were going down South. Tennessee had a famous assistant coach, Stu Aberdeen, who stayed in Queens for a month, was at my dad's high school every day, was at my grandparents' fabric store every day. If you know Tom Konchalski, who was a dear friend of my family's who passed away recently, he saw my dad play in 6th grade, and he was very close with the staff at Tennessee, so he helped. But you know, my dad you know, wanted to go somewhere where he could play right away, but and I think Tennessee, you know, afforded him that. But listen, your question is an apt one, because my dad even talks about it. It's like, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. Like I was taught, you know, we were just, my grandparents were really not a big help. So, and there's actually a funny story in the book that I'll tell you briefly here. Kentucky was recruiting him very hard, and one thing they did for him is they took him to the racetracks at Belmont. You know, they thought it would be a fun thing, and you'll read about this in the book. And he got to see Secretariat, and that was in '73 when Secretariat won the Triple Crown. And so, you know, it was a cool thing. And when he came back, my grandma is like, she's such an upstanding person. She's almost regal in the way she acts. And she said, Ernie, you do whatever you want to do, but you know, they took you to a racetrack, that's gambling. You know, I don't think you should go to Kentucky. You know, so all right, you know, so we went to Tennessee. But yeah, it was a whole new world, but it worked out for the best. Yeah, thank you for that, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Matt. Anybody else have any questions or anything they want to chat with Dan about?
And I'll just say, for, you know, folks out there don't know Holocaust survivors or haven't had a chance to interact one, if any of you do get a chance to pick up the book and read it, you'll know one, because you'll know my grandma. And that, to me, that's the whole thing. You know, for me to have people know my grandma, know that my family lived, know that my uncle lived, you know, these people who passed away, that's really my dream with this. So I just yeah, if you haven't had a lot of experience with Holocaust survivors and you do happen to pick up a copy and read the book, you'll get to know one, and she's pretty special.
I threw the link in the chat. If anybody wants to learn more about the book or purchase the book, feel free to click that, and it'll pop up into a different window so you can take a look at it when we're done with this chat.
Yeah, it's available for pre-order now. All the places you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and yeah, it's again, it's pretty personal, it's pretty deep, but I think it's an important story, of course, for my family, but I think in general, particularly for Jews who like basketball, and I'm in a great chat room for that. So just appreciate everyone's support.
Hey, Dan, great to see you, man.
You too, man.
Would this be, obviously this is a no-brainer read for all of our Maccabi basketball players that are going to be, you know, and so that's something that I'm sure you're working on, and I'm going to pass those messages along to the, you know, to the coaches and things like that. Tell me, do you think this would be a book that our current players would find interesting and could benefit? How so?
I do, Bruce, and it was a hope of mine that, like, you know, coach friends that I have would consider, you know, exposing their players to this. I think ultimately it shows what basketball really is about and what it can do for people. We all have, like, this is my story, but we all have our stories. You do too, Bruce. I know, like, we're so close. I know your background. Like, think about what basketball has done for you, for your family, the relationships. Our relationship came from basketball, you know? So it's really a testament about, yes, it's a game. We play the game, we compete, we want to win, but what this game can do for people's lives is unbelievable. And, you know, my dad is an extreme example because of the circumstances that he was born into, but we all have the story, you know, and the values of this particular story: perseverance, hard work, overcoming adversity. These are the things we deal with, you know. And the other part of it is, there's some heavy themes, but it's fun. You know me, I'm joking around, I'm telling fun stories, there's funny stuff. So like, my hope was that younger folks who maybe don't have as much exposure to the Holocaust, to Jewish history, would engage with that, but a wrapper of basketball. You know, because ultimately we like to read about the game. So there's fun stories about the Knicks and my days at Stanford. Not to bring that up, Coach Pastner, we had some battles back in the day. We don't need to go into it, you know. But you know, like, so I do think, and my hope, and I know my publisher's hope, is that, yeah, young players will love to engage with it, because it is the type of story that is still relevant.
Well, Danny, I just want to thank you for doing this, and I want to thank you for being out front. I want to thank you for wearing your Judaism on your sleeve, and your family has let the light shine upon you, you know, for all of us to see. You know, I think we need as much of this as we can possibly get right now, to inspire American Jewry to recognize the challenges that we're facing with the rise in anti-Semitism everywhere. And we also need to find ways to embrace allies, those people that will support us in the Christian community, that we really need moving forward. So I just thank you so much for your leadership, and I look forward to reading the book, and we definitely need a reunion of your gold medal team. And every time I not every time, but oftentimes when I talk to your dad, I remind him of his silver medal and your gold.
There you go. You got to do it. Bruce, you're the best, man. No, I appreciate it. And, you know, it's real, and it means so much. And, you know, you mentioned like having allies, and I could say to this group here, like, I was very troubled with all the anti-Semitic incidents and events, and the lack of kind of allyship, and people not speaking out as much as, you know, I would have hoped. And, you know, an injustice against one is an injustice against all, you know. So if you know, a Jewish story, and that's why Ray is so great, and he's been such a great advocate, and that's kind of his approach. Is like, hey, this is about humanity. Like, if you'll do it to this one set of people, other people do it to another set, right? So I think just, yeah, raising the awareness, getting people to be allies for us being allies for others is couldn't be more important.
Is there anybody else that would care to ask a question or give a comment? Or
Hey, listen, I'm so grateful that you all spent this time just, you know, hearing about the book, hearing about the stories. It really means a lot to me. I know, you know, it's dinner time, we all have families, so thanks for spending this time with me. And, you know, the support of the book is just, it means a lot. So thank you to everyone.
yeah, and thank you, Dan, for joining us. You know, really excited on behalf of the Jewish Coaches Association. You know, we want to continue having some great speakers on, and so we're really honored to have you as our first, hopefully in our many speakers that we can have. But you know, would love to provide that opportunity for you to continue to get that story out, like we've been talking about throughout this evening. And you've done an amazing job. I'm really excited to read the book. Anybody that asks me, either on our team here at Yale or just outside friends that are in coaching, I would highly recommend any of them tune in. And I also wanted to make sure that I gave a shout out and said thank you to Adam Gordon from Rising Coaches, who graciously helped sponsor this talk tonight, and provided a lot of help and marketing and resources to get the word out there. But for those of you all that are a member of either the Rising Coaches organization or the Jewish Coaches Association, we look forward to seeing you guys throughout the year. We wish everybody good luck in your respective seasons. This is a great community. We really want to support each other. So hopefully go check out the website for Dan's book. pre-order it, maybe order a copy for your mom or dad or sister or brother, or the whole family.
What about the uncles, right? Aunts, uncles. Let's be ambitious. No,
order it for as many as
Yeah.
you can. We want to support Dan and again, just help spread the word on this incredible story that he's here to tell. So thank you again for everybody that was here this evening to join us. Thank you for taking your time this evening to speak with us, Dan. And we hope to see you all in the future soon. So stay safe. Good luck, everybody, getting your seasons started up. And until next time, take care.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.